Hi everyone! This is a news story, especially for the Life Stories channel. Enjoy watching! The soft buzz of the countryside welcomed me as I stepped onto the porch of my grandparents' residence. Surrounded by vast land just outside the urban area, this place was my haven. I was now 23 years old, residing in the house that had been passed down to me due to the unfortunate circumstances of losing my grandparents, and years prior, my parents. Savoring my morning coffee, I reflected on the days spent here with my mother and father. The sound of my mother's laughter still resonated through the hallways, while my father's wise words lingered in the atmosphere. It had been 12 years since my mother succumbed to cancer, and life had never been the same. My father, always the diligent worker, continued his job out of town while I remained here, tending to my grandparents during their final years. As I wandered through the house, I paused in front of a family portrait. "You've always exhibited strength, haven't you?" I softly murmured to the image of my mother, a gentle smile adorning her face. The doorbell chimed, snapping me out of my daydream. It was my father, his expression a mix of excitement and unease. "Hey, pumpkin," he greeted me, his voice tinged with an indescribable emotion. "Dad, why are you here so early?" I inquired, taken aback. He nervously adjusted his hat, a clear indication that he had something important to share. "I have some news, sweetheart. I'm getting married." Married? The word reverberated in my mind. "Wow, Dad, that's wonderful." I managed to conceal my surprise. "Who is the fortunate lady?" He smiled somewhat sheepishly. "Her name is Tabia. You haven't met her yet. She's a bit younger." The heavy silence hung between us, burdened with unspoken thoughts. "Does she bring you joy?" I inquired, attempting to sound supportive. "Yes, she does. Quite a lot," Dad responded, his eyes brightening. "Actually, that's why I'm here. Tabby and her children need a place to reside. I was hoping they could move in here." "Move in? Here?" Suddenly, the house felt cramped, the walls closing in. "Dad, this is a significant decision. It's not just my abode, it's our ancestral home. It's where Mom—" I know, he interjected, a hint of desperation in his voice. "But it's a spacious dwelling, and you'll hardly notice their presence. Please consider it." I nodded, more shocked than in agreement. "I will contemplate it, Dad." He placed a hand on my shoulder, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "Thanks, pumpkin. I knew I could rely on you." As he departed, I stood in the vacant hallway, the weight of his requests sinking in. This house, with its memories and remnants of the past, was on the verge of an everlasting transformation, and I wasn't certain if I was prepared for it. The ensuing weeks brought a whirlwind of change. Dad's betrothed, Tavia, moved in with her 2 young offspring. The once serene house now resounded with the laughter of children, the clatter of toys, and Tavia's constant chatter. One evening, as I prepared dinner, Tavia entered the kitchen. She appeared younger than I had envisioned, her presence both commanding and delicate. "I hope I'm not intruding," she remarked, her voice tinged with careful politeness. "No, not at all. Can I assist you with something?" Keeping my tone amiable, I responded by expressing gratitude for their hospitality. I conveyed how much it meant to me, and especially to the children, as I glanced towards the living room where they were playing. I assured them that it was not a problem at all, as my father wanted everyone to feel comfortable here. As I continued chopping vegetables with unnecessary vigor, Tabby observed me for a moment. She expressed her hope that we could be friends, or at least get along for the sake of our fathers. I paused, contemplating her words, and replied that I shared the same hope, suggesting that we take it one day at a time. The conversation concluded there, but it marked the beginning of an uneasy coexistence. One afternoon, my father summoned me into the living room for a discussion. Tabby was already seated primly on the edge of the sofa. My father's tone was serious as he began to speak. I sat down, preparing myself for whatever was to come. Tabby interjected, asking what was going on. My father then revealed the unexpected news. Tabby was pregnant. The revelation struck me like a bolt out of the blue, leaving me barely able to whisper a response. My father's face beamed with joy as he shared his excitement, but he also acknowledged that arrangements needed to be made for the baby. A sense of foreboding started to grow within me as I pondered the word arrangements. Tabby took over the conversation, explaining that they were considering using my room as a nursery since it was the largest. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They wanted my room? My immediate reaction was to stand up abruptly, stating that I needed time to think about it. It was the room where I had grown up. The location where I had grieved for my mother and grandparents was not simply an area. It constituted a part of who I am. We comprehend, but please consider the infant, Tabby has expressed, her eyes imploring. I exited the chamber, my thoughts racing. This went beyond a mere request for space. It presented a challenge to my position in the household and the kinship. I needed to come to a decision, but regardless of what I chose, I realized that things would never be identical again. For numerous days, the plea to relinquish my room loomed over me like a somber cloud. The abode, once a representation of tradition and solace, now felt encroached upon and unfamiliar. I struggled with sentiments of bitterness and displacement. One evening, Tavia approached me in the parlor, where I sat pondering my alternatives. She cautiously took a seat, her hands clasped in her lap. I desired to converse with you concerning the room predicament, she commenced, her voice wavering. I exhaled deeply, recognizing that this discussion was inevitable. Yes, regarding that. I have been contemplating, she promptly interjected. I understand it is a significant request, but I have a suggestion. I possess an apartment in the metropolis. You could relocate there at a reduced rental fee. It is an excellent abode for someone your age. Her proposal caught me off guard. Depart to your apartment. The boldness of her proposition wounded. Yes, it would be ideal for you, and it would truly assist us in this situation, she added, attempting to sound persuasive. I experienced a surge of rebellion. This dwelling is my sanctuary, Tabia. It is not solely a place of residence. It is where my family's chronicles reside. I cannot simply pack up and depart. But consider the baby, she pleaded. The infant possesses the entire residence, I objected, and there is also father's room. Why does it have to be mine, and there is also father's room? Why does it have to be mine? Tabia's expression hardened. We believe you would be more understanding. You are young. You can start anew elsewhere. The discussion concluded on a sour note, creating a divide between us. The following day, I discovered Father in his study and decided to confront him. Father, we must discuss Tabby's proposition. He glanced up fatigued. I know, my dear, it is a difficult situation. Father, I cannot believe you are asking me to vacate my own abode, I exclaimed, my voice quivering with emotion. He sighed, running his hand through his hair. I am not asking you to leave. I thought perhaps you would desire a change, but now I see it was a mistake to suggest it. Father, this house is all I have remaining of Mother and our family. I cannot simply relinquish it, I stated, feeling a mixture of sadness and frustration. He nodded, understanding Donnie in his eyes. I comprehend, I truly do. Let us find an alternative solution. We will find a way to make it work somehow. The relief was immediate, yet the damage had been done. The residence no longer felt like a sanctuary. It had become a battlefield of conflicting desires, and I found myself in the midst, fighting to hold onto the final fragment of my past. The atmosphere in the house grew heavy with tension after my refusal to depart. Tabby's demeanor towards me shifted. Her once cautious politeness transformed into cold indifference. Father was caught in the middle, attempting to maintain harmony but clearly torn. On a bright afternoon, while I was seated on the rear veranda, my father joined me, his countenance marked with concern. Darling, we must have a conversation, he began, taking a seat beside me. Father, if this pertains to the room once again, my response remains unchanged, I stated firmly. He let out a sigh. I understand. It's just that Tabia is truly distraught. She had her heart set on that room for the baby. I looked at him, feeling a mixture of empathy and exasperation. Father, I have already made many sacrifices. This is my home as well. Why can't Tabia comprehend that? He glanced downward, nervously fidgeting with his hands. She's under a tremendous amount of stress, with the pregnancy and all, and she feels as though you don't want her here. That's not true, I protested. I agreed to their move-in, didn't I? But why should accommodating them mean relinquishing my space? Father nodded. You're right, more than just accommodating even. I will speak with her. We will find a solution. Later that week, Tavia confronted me in the kitchen. So, you truly refuse to give up your room? She asked, her tone accusatory. I turned to face her, standing my ground. No, Tavia, I won't. This was my grandparents' house, and now it belongs to me. There is ample space here without taking my room. Tavia's eyes flashed with anger. Your father has savings, you know. He could purchase a house for us. Why don't you suggest that? The suggestion caught me off guard. Buy them a house. With his retirement savings, I was incredulous. Yes, why not? He has enough, and it would solve all of our problems, she insisted. I shook my head in disbelief. Tavia, it is not my place to make such a proposition. I approached my father to discuss his financial decisions, expressing my concern about using his retirement savings for certain expenses. As I voiced my opinion, her face flushed with anger. She accused me of not wanting them in the house and labeled me as selfish. In response, I calmly explained that it wasn't about not wanting them there, but rather about respecting my personal space and my right to the house. Tabia stormed out of the kitchen, leaving me alone to contemplate the absurdity of the situation. I found myself portrayed as the antagonist for wanting to preserve a part of my family history and my safe haven. However, I knew I had to stand my ground. This was more than just a room. It was about preserving my identity and connection to my past. The tension within the house continued to escalate. Whispers and sidelong glances became commonplace, and I felt increasingly isolated in my own home. While my determination to keep my room remained unwavering, the emotional toll started to weigh heavily on me. One evening, as I returned from a walk, I bumped into Mrs. Henderson, our neighbor, near the fence. Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman who had known my family for years, expressed her concern about the recent commotion coming from our house. I reassured her with a forced smile, downplaying the situation as a mere adjustment period for the family. Sensing her curiosity, she leaned in closer and whispered about the news of a new addition to the family and Tavia, my father's new partner. Confirming her assumptions, I wondered where this conversation was heading. Mrs. Henderson sighed. You know, darling, sometimes within families, we must make sacrifices for the greater good. Perhaps relinquishing your bedroom isn't such a terrible idea. Her words stung, even though I knew they were well-meaning. Mrs. Henderson, it's not simply a room. It's where I matured, where I feel closest to my mother and grandparents. She nodded sympathetically. I comprehend, darling. Families also involve compromise, just something to contemplate. I expressed gratitude and continued back to the house, her words reverberating in my thoughts. The following day, I overheard my father conversing on the telephone in his study. Curiosity got the best of me, and I lingered outside the door. Yes, I understand it's difficult, but she refuses to budge on the room. I heard him say, there was a pause. I cannot coerce her. She has every right to it. And with the baby on the way, I don't know what to do. I felt a pang of guilt, but quickly dismissed it. This was about more than just a room. It was a stance for my rights and memories. Later during dinner, Tavia broached the subject again. We have been contemplating. Maybe you could search for a place in the city. It could be a fresh start for you, she suggested, her tone a combination of hope and manipulation. I set down my fork, feeling a surge of frustration. Tabia, we have already discussed this. I am not relocating. This is my abode. Dad, appearing weary, interjected. Let us not engage in this discussion during dinner. We all reside under the same roof. We need to discover a way to coexist harmoniously. His words were intended to pacify the situation, but they only emphasized the escalating tension. There was a rift between the two of us. I completed my meal in quietness. My thoughts were a chaotic blend of rage and sorrow. That evening, I lay in bed gazing at the ceiling. The room, with its familiar shadows and comforting silence, served as a sanctuary amidst the turmoil. I understood that taking a stand might lead to further conflict, but I couldn't sever this final tie to my family. It was a battle I didn't seek, but one I was determined to wage. Amidst my own inner turmoil, I soon found myself entangled in another family crisis. My brother's former wife, Laura, unexpectedly reached out to me. Our relationship had always been superficial, limited to brief interactions during family gatherings. I was in my room when my phone rang. Seeing Laura's name appear on the screen piqued my curiosity and sparked a hint of apprehension. Hello, Laura. This is quite a surprise, I greeted. Hi, I need to discuss something important with you, she replied, her voice trembling slightly. What's happening? I asked, concern seeping into my tone. It's about your brother. We're going through a divorce, and he has left me in a challenging financial situation. I was hoping that maybe you could assist me. Her request caught me off guard. I hesitated, carefully selecting my words. Laura, I'm sorry to hear that, but I'm unsure how I can be of help. She sounded desperate. I just need some financial support, perhaps assistance with childcare. I'm truly struggling here. Laura, we barely know each other. While I sympathize with your circumstances, I cannot provide financial aid. It's simply not feasible for me at this moment, I responded. Replied, experiencing a combination of remorse and exasperation. There was a lengthy pause before she spoke once more. I believed that family provided support for one another, women empowering women. I let out a sigh, feeling the burden of her expectations. I can propose having your children visit occasionally, giving you a respite, but I am unable to do more than that. Her disillusionment was tangible. I understand. Well, thank you regardless, she uttered before terminating the conversation. I sat there momentarily, holding my phone, grappling with conflicting emotions. Assisting family was one matter, but this felt like an intrusion, particularly coming from someone I scarcely knew. The following day, my father inquired about the call. We were in the living room, an uncomfortable space filled with the strain of our ongoing disagreement. Laura contacted you, didn't she? He questioned, his expression displaying concern. Yes, she did. She is requesting money and assistance with the children, I responded. My father nodded, his brow furrowed. She is in a difficult situation, but you should not feel obligated to provide financial aid. It is a significant request. I understand, Dad, it's just challenging. I feel as though I am being pulled in multiple directions, expected to solve everyone's problems. I confessed, the stress of the situation evident in my voice. My father reached out, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. You can only do so much, my dear. Do not allow it to weigh you down. You are already dealing with enough. His words offered some solace, but the intricate nature of my relationships with my family members remained a perplexing puzzle. Each piece, whether fitting or not, constituted a portion of the larger picture. My life in a snapshot. Juggling these dynamics while holding my ground was becoming an increasingly challenging endeavor. To escape the mounting stress at home, I made the decision to attend the wedding of a dear family acquaintance. It provided a welcome diversion, a day brimming with happiness and revelry. However, an unforeseen incident at the wedding introduced a fresh wave of family turmoil. The wedding was in full swing when my sibling's sister Alice made her entrance. To my astonishment and dismay, she was clad in a delicate white gown strikingly similar to a bridal dress. The hushed whispers and disapproving glances from the other attendees were instantaneous. As I stood there, trying to comprehend the situation, my closest friend Marie approached me. "Can you fathom this? She's wearing white to another person's wedding." Marie murmured, her eyes widened in disbelief. "I know, it's inconceivable. She simply adores being the center of attention," I replied, striving to keep my voice low. As the evening progressed, the predicament with Alice continued to be the topic of conversation at the wedding. Guests continually mistook her for the bride, much to Alice's delight but to the chagrin of the actual bride. Marie, who had been growing increasingly agitated, excused herself to fetch a beverage. I observed her weaving through the crowd, her expression one of determined mischief. A few moments later, I spotted Marie making her way back towards us. She stumbled, accidentally spilling her crimson wine all over Alice's pristine white attire. Article: The Unfortunate Dress Incident at the Wedding. The atmosphere was filled with gasps as the surrounding guests reacted audibly to what had just happened. Alice let out a shriek, her face displaying a mixture of shock and anger. "My dress! Look at what you've done!" she exclaimed. Marie appeared apologetic, although I could sense that it was merely an act. "Oh my goodness, Alice, I am so sorry. It was a complete accident." Alice stormed off to the bathroom, followed closely by her mother. Meanwhile, my brother's father approached us, his face flushed with anger. "Your friend needs to leave immediately. She did that on purpose." I stood my ground, defending Marie. "It was an unintentional mistake. She had a bit to drink and lost her balance. She's not going anywhere." My brother's father was fuming. "This is unacceptable. She ruined my daughter's dress." I addressed my father firmly, trying to diffuse the situation. "Dad, Alice shouldn't have worn white in the first place. It's a wedding, not her personal fashion show." He stormed off, clearly unsatisfied with my response. Mary gave me a knowing look, and I couldn't help but feel a mix of gratitude and guilt. The incident cast a shadow over the remainder of the wedding. My in-laws were furious with me, and the bride and groom were understandably upset that their special day had been disrupted. As I lay in bed that night, the events replayed in my mind. Standing up for Marie was the right thing to do, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the family divide had deepened. Alice's actions and the subsequent fallout were just another example of the complex dynamics I had to navigate within my family. The aftermath of the wedding incident lingered like a dark cloud over the entire family. At home, the tension between us was palpable. The tension in the air was palpable as my father and Tibia shot disapproving glances at me whenever they had the chance. The constant comments from my in-laws about the incident made it clear that they held me and Marie responsible for ruining the wedding. One evening, during a quiet dinner with my father, he finally broached the subject. "You know, your in-laws have been incessantly discussing the wedding mishap," he said, his voice tinged with frustration. I set down my fork, preparing myself for the conversation. "Dad, it was an unintentional mistake. Marie didn't mean to spill wine on Alice," I explained. He sighed, massaging his temples. "I understand, pumpkin, but they don't see it that way. They believe you encouraged her actions, thinking it was some form of retaliation for Alice wearing white." Anger surged within me. "That's absurd. Why would I do something like that?" And Alice was out of line wearing white to a wedding. Dad nodded in agreement. "I agree, but you know how they are. They always think their children can do no wrong." The conversation ended there, but the issue remained unresolved. The following day, my mother-in-law called me, her tone cold and accusatory. "I can't believe you would condone such childish behavior at a wedding. You and your friend owe Alice an apology," she demanded. Taking a deep breath, I tried to stay calm. "I'm sorry you feel that way, but it was an accident, and Alice wearing white to a wedding was inappropriate." Her voice grew louder. "Inappropriate? She's just a child. You're the adult here. You should know better." "A child? She's a grown woman, and I made a decision that was destined to stir up trouble, I responded, my patience wearing thin. You're just envious of her, always have been, she snapped before hanging up. I sat there, phone in hand, feeling a mixture of anger and disbelief. The accusation of envy was ridiculous and hurtful. Later, I confided in Marie about the conversation. We met at a small cafe, a neutral place away from the prying eyes of our relatives. Marie shook her head, her expression one of disbelief. Jealous? That's absurd. You've always been the mature one, dealing with their nonsense. I know, but it seems like no matter what I do, I can't succeed with them, I said, feeling defeated. Marie reached across the table, squeezing my hand. You don't have to succeed. You just have to stay true to yourself. They'll never comprehend, and that's their problem, not yours. Her words offered some solace, but the weight of the ongoing family drama was a burdensome load to bear. I realized that regardless of my actions, there would always be judgment and criticism. The key was learning how to coexist with it without allowing it to consume me. I realized that regardless of my actions, there would always be judgment and criticism. The key was learning how to coexist with it without allowing it to consume me. The weeks following the wedding were filled with chilly silences and veiled insults from my relatives by marriage. The incident with Alice had created a division that seemed impossible to bridge. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a battlefield where every word and action was scrutinized. One night, while my father and I were seated in the living room, he brought up the incident from the wedding once again. I've been pondering, he began hesitantly. Perhaps we should all gather and have a discussion. Clear the air, you know. I looked at him skeptically. Dad, I don't think that will be helpful. They have already made up their minds about me. He let out a sigh. Maybe so, but we are a family. We cannot continue like this. Before I could respond, Tavia entered the room. Speaking of family, your in-laws called. They are still very upset about the wedding. They believe you owe Alice an apology. I felt a familiar surge of frustration. I have done nothing wrong, Tavia. Why should I apologize for an unintentional mistake? She shrugged. Perhaps not, but sometimes we apologize to maintain harmony. Dad nodded in agreement. She is right. It might help smooth things over. I shook my head, feeling trapped. I will consider it, but I cannot make any promises. The next day, I received a phone call from my brother's mother, my voice filled with apprehension. We need to discuss your conduct at the wedding, she began, her tone sharp. I took a deep breath, attempting to remain calm. I understand that you are upset, but it was an accident. Marie did not do it intentionally. Her response was curt. Accident or not, you have caused a lot of emotional pain. You need to apologize to Alice. I felt my determination strengthen. I am sorry that she is upset, but I do not believe I owe her an apology. I did not spill the wine, and I did not instruct her to wear white to a wedding. There was a brief pause on the line. You are being quite stubborn about this. You are causing a rift in the family. I'm not the one who is being unreasonable here, I responded, my frustration growing. The phone call ended without any resolution, leaving me feeling exhausted and misunderstood. The expectation to apologize for something I hadn't done was unjust, but it was evident that my in-laws wouldn't easily let it go. Later, I spoke with Marie about the situation. We met at our usual cafe, a place that had become our refuge from family conflicts. Marie shook her head and said, You shouldn't have to apologize. It's not your fault that Alice wore white, and it's not your fault that I spilled my drink. I know, but it feels like I'm being backed into a corner. I'm tired of constantly being portrayed as the villain, I said, feeling defeated. Marie leaned in, her expression determined. Don't let them intimidate you into apologizing for something you didn't do. You are stronger than that. Her words provided comfort to my weary spirit. In a world where I consistently felt judged and misunderstood, Marie's unwavering support was priceless. I realized that while I couldn't control the opinions or actions of my in-laws, I could control how I reacted to them. I needed to stay true to myself, even if it meant standing alone. The weeks turned into months, and the household felt more divided than ever. Despite the unresolved tensions, I found solace in my room, which had become my sanctuary amidst the chaos. It served as a reminder of why I'd fought so hard to keep it. One evening, as I sat by the window, my father gently knocked on my door. "May I come in?" he inquired, his voice betraying a hint of uncertainty. "Certainly, father," I responded, shifting to create room for him. He settled down, casting a wistful smile as he surveyed the room. "Your mother adored this room. She always claimed it offered the finest view in the entire house." I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. "That's why I couldn't bear to part with it. It's not just a mere chamber, Dad. It's a fragment of her, of us." He reached out and clasped my hand in his. "I comprehend, my dear, and I apologize for pressuring you. You were correct in standing your ground." His acknowledgement meant more to me than he could fathom. "Thank you, Father. That means a great deal." He gently squeezed my hand. "I understand that things have been challenging with Tavia and your in-laws, but remember, you are not alone. I am here for you always." His words provided solace, serving as a reminder that despite the conflicts, our bond remained unyielding. The following day, I resolved to take a step toward repairing our strained relationships. I extended an invitation to Tavia for a cup of tea in the kitchen. She accepted, albeit with a hint of surprise. As we settled down, I broached the subject cautiously. "Tavia, I am aware that tensions have arisen between us. I desire to find a way for us to coexist harmoniously in this dwelling." She gazed at me, her expression softening. "I appreciate that. I realize I have been insistent about the room. I suppose I simply wanted everything to be perfect for the baby." I nodded, understanding her perspective. "And I want to support you and Father, but we must also respect each other's personal space and boundaries." Tavia took a sip of her tea, pondering my words. "You're right. I am willing to make an effort if you are. Vocabulary, you're correct. I am ready to attempt if you are."